And ordinary South Africans also got to have their say about the budget during the public hearings this week. Plus, the new KwaZulu-Natal ANC Provincial Task Team paid a visit to King Misuzulu Kazwelithini to kiss and make up. I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo, and this is your Week in Politics. Ebrahim Rasool is back in the country after his expulsion as ambassador to the United States. His first order of business on Monday morning was to report to the International Relations Headquarters in Tshwane, where he had a debrief with Minister Ronald Lamola. While the nature of the discussions were not disclosed, the department says a formal report will now be sent to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa has been asked about how soon he intends to replace Rasool in Washington.
Our ambassador has come back home, and obviously it behoves on us as a government to mull over replacing our ambassador. The United States is the second largest trading partner to South Africa, so therefore we need to have top-class representation in the US, and that is something that we are still working on.
Despite the government desperately wanting the dust to settle down promptly, there were still raging debates about whether Rasool should have continued making remarks about his expulsion upon his return at the Cape Town International Airport on Sunday. This after Ramaphosa warned against inflammatory statements that might worsen the already strained relations between Pretoria and Washington.
Ideally speaking, he should have not said anything at the airport. He should have just arrived and sort of greeted all his friends and acquaintances and so on, but did not making any type of statement like he did. Because that is, in a sense, perpetuating what he did at the Mistra webinar. You know, what many people don't understand is that the ambassador is not a politician. The ministers and the presidents and so on, they are the political side of it. The ambassador plays a very specific role, and I think where he failed is that he did not draw that distinction between his role as a politician, which was what he has been all the years, and the role of an ambassador, which is a much more facilitative type of person, and not so much a person who talks about policy or tries to make policy or to determine policy in the context of an embassy. That's simply not the role of an embassy.
But Safdu believes Rasool had every right to tell the truth.
We disagree. Perhaps it's because we are not diplomats. We are trade unionists. We believe in truth-telling under all circumstances. We believe in the exposure of lies whenever they are told. And we currently believe that Donald Trump's policies are anything but a threat to the world peace. They are destabilizing not just the relationship between South Africa and that nation, but they are about spreading misinformation to bolster an extreme right-wing, white supremacist agenda here in South Africa.
Meanwhile, one political economist and critic of the current government, Moeletsi Mbeki, has reflected on how the U.S. Congress passed the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which was able to override President Ronald Reagan's veto and ultimately impose sanctions on the apartheid government in 1986. Mbeki says allies of the United States were rallied to follow suit and warns that history could repeat itself now if the current situation is not well managed.
What we don't understand, or what this government doesn't understand, is that if the Americans act against them, they have this massive network of allies and alliances who they can activate against South Africa. And that's what happened with the apartheid government, and they warned them, and they actually brought those people to their conference, and they warned Neil van Heerden, that's what we're going to do if you don't settle this issue.
But this point is interesting, because who right now would you argue is allied to America and has not been upset by the Trump administration?
The Trump administration has upset a lot of people. It has upset the Germans, it has upset the British, it has upset the French, but all these countries are under the American security umbrella. So when push comes to shove, when America says to them, jump, they ask how high.
And while our Ramaphosa mulls over who he believes would be a top candidate to replace Rasool, the Trump administration is resolute on Bozell III becoming U.S. ambassador to South Africa. I wonder then how Polak is feeling this week after all that bidding he'd done through his website to get the gig while discrediting our country. Now, Bozell's nomination also takes place in a week where several countries presented their credentials before Ramaphosa, a process the new U.S. ambassador will have to undertake when they arrive in Pretoria.
This is a surprise for two reasons. First of all, Brent Bozell thought he already had a job in the Trump administration. He was supposed to be heading up the Agency for Global Media. That is the umbrella organization at government level that oversees the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, all the other international broadcasting activities of the United States government. But as you know, as of 2 weekends ago, all of those activities were shut down. So suddenly Brent Bozell was essentially putting himself out of a job by closing all of those different media organs. So he's now getting a new job, potentially in South Africa, if he's confirmed. The other reason, of course, why it's a surprise is because we all thought that Donald Trump's nominee was going to be Joel Pollak, the writer from Breitbart News, who has the president's ear and is definitely one of those prominent voices that has taken the US-South African bilateral relationship, I think it's not overstating it to say, into the abyss over the last few weeks. So in Brent Bozell, the Trump administration is picking a figure who, unlike Joel Pollak, has not been publicly critical of the South African government, but he's definitely someone who is absolutely aligned from a geopolitical and ideological perspective with Donald Trump.
Still on diplomatic postings, a cabinet this week also reflected on Bozell's candidature, and Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, shared the outcomes of that meeting on Thursday. She says America has the prerogative to choose whomever they want to replace Reuben Brigety, who resigned in November last year.
The U.S. is a sovereign state, so they have the right to choose their own ambassador. They don't have to consult with us. Ours is when we receive the credentials, to consider the credentials and decide whether to accept and not accept them.
The announcement of Bozell's appointment came a day after the International Relations Department's Director General, Ziyanda Ngcobo, appeared before the UN General Assembly in New York to outline South Africa's G20 presidency priorities and theme for the year. Ngcobo received overwhelming support and endorsement from the gathering.
As we convene here, we're in the midst of what the United Nations Secretary General has referred to as a global polycrisis. The interconnected nature of the threats facing humanity today, poverty, inequality, hunger, ever escalating geopolitical tensions, fragmentation, global warming, pandemics, energy and food insecurities, but also rising intolerance and armed conflict is causing further hardship and suffering.
And right next door to South Africa, the newly minted Namibian President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah's administration has released new requirements for U.S. tourists who want to visit that country. Starting from the 1st of April, American citizens will have to apply for a visa when wanting to trek to that southwestern nation. Coming back home, the AmaZulu king, Misuzulu Kazwelithini, is being kept busy with constant visits from political parties. This time around, the newly appointed ANC provincial task team trekked to the Kwakhangela Mankengane Royal Palace to officially introduce themselves and smoke a peace pipe with His Majesty after several incidents that have strained relations. While the nature of any relationship is never perfect, who can forget the now infamous mic-grabbing incident with former provincial chairperson Siboniso Duma yanking the microphone from now former AmaZulu traditional Prime Minister Thulasi Mkhize Buthelezi, who also happens to rank high within the IFP. All of this just 3 months shy of the party's most important election in May last year. Remember this?
Boys, in fact, besicela ukuthi sihloniphe usuku esekona ngishaya ngicela uhlale phansi besitanzothula isilo uyawulimaza umcimbi omuhle kangaka wesilo sasosuthu. You are becoming clumsy, and esizathu esenza ukuthi sihloniphane ukuthi okade phambili ngaphambi kwakho beyihlonipha into ya government. Msindazo socela ukuthi kwehlonipho usithulele isilo singawoni umcimbi.
At the time, disbanded ANC KZN Secretary Bheki Mtolo dug in his heels, defending Duma's behavior as being justified because he was disciplining an ill-disciplined individual. He accused Buthelezi of trying to score cheap political points and abusing his traditional prime minister role, which is meant to be apolitical. But now the tone has completely changed, with the ANC invoking the memory of the incumbent king's great-grandfather, King Dinuzulu Kacetshwayo, who was the party's inaugural president of the then South African Native Congress in 1912.
The main thrust of our visit is to pay homage. And in the process of paying homage, we do not want to try and anticipate what we may or may not discuss. But of course, this is a visit of goodwill, a visit where we are actually going to be strengthening the relationship between the African National Congress and the royal family, in particular His Majesty the King. And at the essence of it, it is that, and of course, any other issue that we may then discuss, probably will report after the meeting if there are any other issues that we would have discussed.
The AmaZulu monarch has previously sharply raised concerns and discomfort with the management of issues related to the Ithala Bank and the Ingonyama Trust. He has intimated that he knows and strongly believes that there's a political party behind what he described as shenanigans.
He raised it very strongly on the issue of Ithala and Ingonyama Trust, as you know, in particular with the Ithala, as you know, that there is a legal process that is unfolding. So, but we have undertaken, because it's not our competence per se, but we are a very interested party as the ANC to find a peaceful resolution of all those two critical areas. I'm very disturbed myself when I hear ordinary people complaining about the challenges they face with Ithala. For an example, about 4 weeks ago, I had one gentleman from Mlazi who is a former policeman, not far from here, Ondine, but now he was working in Mlazi. He resigned as a policeman, and then he used to bank with Absa Bank. Then he changed when he retired from the police to take his lump sum of more than 700,000 rand from Absa Bank to Ithala. All of a sudden in February, he's told that he can't get his savings that he put there. So these are the issues that are very critical.
We'll see whether the renewal and rebuilding process being undertaken by the former liberation movement will yield the intended results come next year's local government elections, which are already shaping up to be historic. Coming up after the break, we'll look at the chances of the 2025 budget being passed by Parliament next week as fierce opposition to the 0.5 percentage point VAT hike gets louder. It seems like the fallout between the ANC and DA within the Government of National Unity could extend well beyond the budget, with Luthuli House contemplating reconfiguring the GNU. But what would a reconstituted cabinet look like without the second largest party? Or will the two biggest parties find each other sometime this weekend? Perhaps then this is a case of the ANC still refusing to accept that it no longer has a hegemony in the legislature. I'll have more on that and other stories after this. Welcome back. You're still tuned into Your Week in Politics here on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. So there are only a few days left before the 2025 budget is expected to be passed in Parliament. But behind the scenes negotiations this week don't seem to give confidence that there'll be consensus amongst MPs. It also looks like the ANC is not only courting parties outside the GNU in order to pass the budget, but they are now toying with the idea of possibly reconstituting government without the DA. But is this too premature? What does the second largest party have to say after remaining resolute that in no uncertain terms will they accept a 0.5 percentage point VAT hike? In Parliament on Friday, Minister Enoch Godongwana claimed that the DA has written to President Cyril Ramaphosa that they're willing to accept the proposed VAT hike on condition that certain laws be scrapped. Godongwana was speaking before the Standing Committee on Finance.
Where is the DA on Ncobo 5? The DA has sent a letter to the President accepting Ncobo 5 in exchange for things which are outside the budget, like the Expropriation Act and so on and so on. Why am I making this statement, Chair? Is that we are more than happy to interact with Parliament and discuss the modalities if there are any changes in the budget and that those changes be confined to a debate about the budget. We accept that the Parliament has got authority to amend the budget, but we would plead that the matters be focused on how to make this budget efficient. And in this regard, we're approaching this thing with an open mind.
The DA says it's a pity that Godongwana, who they say has made a hack job of the process in the first place, is now trying to negotiate in bad faith.
He is nitpicking out of a long 13-page document that we sent to the President, in which we set out the economical growth reforms that we want to put on the table. We've mentioned quite a number of them and things that can be done immediately. So to come and nitpick about the Expropriation Act is definitely disingenuous from the Minister. It is high time that the ANC realize that they do not govern alone anymore. This document that both myself and the Minister referred to was sent to the President and the Presidency 12 days ago already. We've received feedback today on that document. And the feedback was that the President said that he does not agree with the document and that we must just simply support the budget. Now, there's absolutely no way in which we can be a common denominator in the ANC's failures.
Meanwhile, the ANC is hoping to use the upcoming weekend to consolidate enough numbers in order to pass the 2025 budget presented by Godongwana 2 weeks ago. This comes as the former Liberation Movement has been forced to explore other options since its GNU partner, the DA, remains opposed to the 0.5 percentage point VAT hike. The ANC says it's reached out to the EFF, Umkhonto weSizwe Party and Action SA. It also says it intends on meeting with Build One South Africa's Mmusi Maimane over the weekend.
We can't get past from an Action SA standpoint is firstly that the South African government wants to reach deeper into the pockets of ordinary South Africans at a time in which this budget does absolutely nothing to curtail the incredible wastages and inefficiencies of the most bloated cabinet in the history of our country. But also we can't get past the mental block that we are an opposition party being asked by a government that is made up of 70% of the South African people to help them approve a budget with an unpopular tax increase when they themselves should be sitting down and sorting things out. And that is why what we have said to the ANC is get your budget approved by your partners and not by the opposition. And if you can't do that, reconstitute a new government that can.
The MK party says it would only be willing to work with the ANC if it doesn't increase VAT at all.
We were never going to even entertain an idea of discussing whether we must permit the increase of VAT as part of the budgeting options. There's several alternatives which our public representatives have presented, which should constitute the alternate to increasing the value-added tax in South Africa's budgeting framework. And I think that before the ANC approaches Umkhonto weSizwe, they should have made a public announcement already that there's not going to be any VAT increase.
At the same time, over 20 organizations made inputs during public hearings held by Parliament on Tuesday. COSATU and the Budget Justice Coalition, among others, have called on the halting or total scrapping of the VAT hike.
We recommend that the VAT increase is halted until Treasury demonstrates that alternatives have been tested and impacts assessed. So we would like to see sort of every every single alternative and looked at before something that we believe is going to have such a negative impact on the country is implemented.
We are, however, opposed to the VAT hike, and we appreciate it's less than the 2%, but we still feel a VAT hike, it hits the working class especially, who are just simply drowning in debt, are struggling to survive, and so forth.
One organization, the Public Economic Project, has cautioned that the conversation that now needs to be heard is around re-looking legislation around the passing of budgets, particularly given the new political reality of coalitions. Should no consensus be reached, the Public Finance Management Act allows government spending to continue based on the previous year's budget allocations.
To the poor, the farmer, to the poor, the farmer.
On Thursday, the Constitutional Court denied AfriForum's application for leave to appeal an earlier judgment, which ruled that the struggle song Dubuli Bonu does not amount to hate speech. This is what Malema had to say on social media about the court outcome. But AfriForum says the response from the country's apex court reflects an increasingly radical implementation of the Constitution by ideologically driven judges. They also say they've taken notice of President Ramaphosa's refusal to condemn the statements. The lobby group's Kali Grill says the continued use of the song undermines the freedoms promised in 1994, which also includes those afforded to Afrikaners.
With a shocking judgment like this seems no longer the case. You can sing or chant that somebody should be killed, and it's fine. And if I can give you a specific example of a judge, Judge Raylene Keatley. She was, before our court case regarding this matter, a few years before that, she openly stated that negative attitudes towards AfriForum, insults towards AfriForum, which shows a clear bias. We then said, and that was also now part of our case to the Constitutional Court, if you're going to have a judge that is clearly has an ideological bias towards you, she should not be on the bench. And the judges of the appeal court said, no, it's fine. She can be there. The Constitutional Court disregarded this.
Former President Jacob Zuma has joined an application by his co-accused in the arms deal trial, which seeks to stop the prosecution and get an immediate acquittal. French arms company Thales filed papers last month pleading with the High Court to permanently halt the matter, as two key witnesses have since died, and this could impact their right to a fair trial. Zuma submitted an affidavit joining this application, saying this will also have a direct impact on him as the first accused in the 1990s corruption scandal. Zuma has lost 2 attempts to have a permanent stay of prosecution in the arms deal trial. But in his affidavit, where he wants to join Thales' application, Zuma believes he too would be impacted by the deaths of the 2 witnesses, as their testimonies are key to their defense. One of the deceased is said to have been the author of an encrypted fax, allegedly on behalf of Zuma, to solicit a bribe from Thales through his former financial advisor, Shabir Sheikh. The second witness who died authored the forensic report on which the allegations are premised.
Well, the court must separate the two and deal with the merits of each accused as it comes to them. So they will say to Thales, let's deal with you and say, what are your prospects of success? What are the facts that you've came with us to? The same would apply to the former president, in which they will say to him, well, it's not as if you're coming here for the first time. You've done so twice before. We've denied you your appropriate relief. Probably you're going to do the same now, because all the things that you are stating in your statement or in your affidavit has been dealt with before.
The state has blamed Zuma for the several postponements of the start of the trial since May 2021, accusing him of continuing with Stalingrad tactics through continuous appeals. But Zuma has responded that he's entitled to exercise his rights, and that even when he was incarcerated in July that year, he abandoned his right to appear in court in order for the matter to continue. He then goes on to quote Pietermaritzburg High Court Judge Piet Koen, who, while delivering his judgment on whether to postpone the matter again, affirmed the former president's argument that the setbacks were legally permissible.
The appeal process should be allowed to run its course. Mr. Zuma has challenged many decisions adverse to him in the past, usually invoking the entire appeal process to the highest courts in this land, and in many instances has been unsuccessful, which resulted in inevitable and unfortunate delays. He is also on record through previous counsel representing him that he will continue to exercise all rights available to him. But the exercise of those rights, as much as they may be viewed with suspicion and distrust from certain quarters as resulting only in delays, which only favor him, do not per se amount to an abuse of those rights.
The legal twist from Taules, which has now seen Zuma latching onto, means that the start of the trial will again be delayed until the courts decide on whether to permanently drop the charges. A pending trial date has been set down for the 14th of April this year. That's it from me for the latest edition in Your Week in Politics. There's plenty of news coming up in the next few days. The ANC's National Executive Committee is meeting at the Birchwood Hotel to discuss several issues, including receiving a status update on who will support the party in the passing of the budget if the DA still doesn't budge. I wonder whose phones are going to be ringing from the opposition benches this weekend as time runs out. And of course, all eyes will be on Parliament next week as the biggest test of the GNU will be under scrutiny. But for now, it's goodbye. Thank you for watching.